Well, welcome back. We're talking about the United Nations General Assembly, here to discuss the outlook for this year's United Nations General Assembly meetings. From Beijing, Liu Tiewa is Professor of International Studies at Beijing Foreign Studies University. From New York, Raghida Dergham is a columnist and senior diplomatic correspondent for Hayat Daily. And with us here in the studio, Daniel Honig is a Professor of International Development at Johns Hopkins University. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's go to New York and Raghida. Raghida, as we heard from Peter Thompson there's a number of priorities for this assembly: the election of a Secretary General, climate change, the refugee crisis, and of course marking those sustainable development goals. Now, we do know that we're going to have a new Secretary General by October, as he pointed out, but are we likely to see much progress on those other issues that he mentioned?
Well, I think the issues that they are hoping to get some accomplishment about are easier when it comes to the economic issues, to the development issues, but it seems to me they're stuck in the political. On Syria, they're stuck. On resolving the refugees issue, they're stuck. Yes, of course, it's important that they're having a summit or two summits, if you will, on the refugees, but I'm not so sure the solutions. I mean, I'm not so sure that the opportunity was seized as it should have been. I think you are going to find many people sort of trying to secure their legacies or defend their legacies, if you will, starting from President Obama, ending with Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations. So I think the problems persist largely because the conflicts persist without a real solution to these conflicts. Above all, Syria, Libya, Yemen, that unfortunate part of the Middle East.
Liu Tiewa, what will China be bringing to this year's General Assembly meetings, and what are China's priorities?
Actually, I think China will play a more active role in the UN meetings. As a Chinese proverb goes, 言必行，行必果, which means that you need to be trustworthy in words and resolute in deeds. As President Xi visited New York last year and had some promises, I think, our Premier Li Keqiang's visit this time will just demonstrate that China would like to share more responsibilities with the international community and also providing more public goods to the world. And secondly, I think, China would get more involved in like wider range of issues, because we are used to getting involved more in the peace operations, because there are three pillars for the United Nations, namely peace, development, and human rights. And we're used to getting involved in the peace before. But I think from now on, and we have noticed that China would play a vital role in development area, because with the economic development in China in these years, I think we've got a lot of experiences and lessons to share with the world. In the just accomplished G20 summit in Hangzhou, and we saw that for the first time, the countries have adopted the G20 action plan for 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And also for the first time, we encouraged the cooperation with the African countries, especially the least developed countries in the world. So all of these, I think, have a lot of implications for our future strategy.
Dan, how relevant or effective is the United Nations as an international forum, as a platform to get these very important issues resolved? I mean, we hear speakers, they get their voices heard at the United Nations, but at the end of the day, is it just big nations like the United States or perhaps the other members of the UN Security Council as well that actually get things done?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's good to separate out the two parts of that question, relevance and effectiveness, right? So in terms of relevance, the UN is the only big tent we have, quite frankly. It is the place where smaller countries can have their voices heard, can hear their issues heard. And we've seen change from General Assembly to General Assembly in terms of things getting on the agenda. Are the Security Council veto players the most influential members of that system? Absolutely. And that's by design. But it's not the case that others can't participate. In terms of effectiveness, there are definitely things that can be done to make the UN more effective. the veto players, for one, keep things from getting done. And the proposal to expand Security Council membership, whatever its benefits might be in terms of representation, would, by adding more actors, also lead potentially to even less function, less action on behalf of the UN.
Yeah, I want to get to that reform agenda in just a moment, but let me go back to Raghida in New York. Raghida, as we heard Peter Thompson tell us there that there's going to be an election for a new Secretary General. He is trying to make this as transparent a process as he can. But yet we read in the Financial Times that had a story on this, and it said that the process is, although there are desires to have it transparent, the process is now retreating into a more familiar exercise in backroom deal-making that is being dominated by both the rivalries of European politics and Cold War tensions between the United States and Russia. Is that
absolutely true.
Is that
absolutely true.
Fair assessment, yeah?
Yeah, it's a very fair assessment. Look, I have been here at the United Nations for 40 years. This is my 40th anniversary, my 40th General Assembly, and I have been here since Waldheim. And so that makes me the longest serving journalist at the United Nations. But the point is that I'm trying to make is that it's almost business as usual all the time. Yes, it's been much more transparent in the process of the straw polls, in the process of going to the General Assembly. There was a feeling that, this is not the club of the members of the Security Council who was making this choice alone, so bring in the General Assembly and let the member states feel good about it. And yes, it's good. But in the final analysis, it is going to boil down either to the agreements between the United States and Russia or to the current mode and mood of disagreements between the United States and Russia. So it boils down to these two, though it is three others who have the veto power. As to China, and I would like to comment, if you don't mind, on the commentator from China, it will be wonderful to have China play a more active role and a wider role. But it's also important that we hope that China will play its role in the Security Council with all its privileges, rather than sometimes subtracting that to Russia, for example, on Syria. So leaving the leadership role to Russia. I hope that this is true, that China is going to come in with its own set of ideas and its own priorities and action in the General Assembly and the Security Council. But I think it boils down to two, Russia and the United States, who are going to tell us what the surprise is, who is the Secretary General. And it may take several times over. I remember at times when they were not agreeing to a candidate, we had several back and forth sessions between the General Assembly and the Security Council in order to choose the Secretary General of the United Nations. So we'll see what happens.
What do you make of that, Dan, that we hear speaker after speaker and all the candidates making their pitches, but ultimately this is going to be decided by someone sitting in the Oval Office here and someone sitting in the Kremlin in Moscow?
Yeah, so I actually think that's kind of a good thing. That isn't to say that it's a good thing that only those two actors matter, but it's a good thing that we have an international system set up in such a way as to maintain support from the most powerful nations, right? The League of Nations failed precisely because not incorporating power into an understanding of who leads global groups leads those groups to be unstable. I think we should broaden who is part of that mix, but I do think actually it's a good thing for the UN's continuation and for the international community that we make sure that powerful states are behind the choice of Secretary General.
Okay, Liu Tiewa, we mentioned reform, the reform agenda at the United Nations a moment ago. I mean, what is China's position on reforming the Security Council, for instance, to expand the number of people on the Security Council and to expand the number of permanent members as well?
Actually, we always encourage the reform of the United Nations Security Council. But as our professor from Johns Hopkins just mentioned, after the World War II, and we have just witnessed the fiasco of the League of Nations because of that probably lack of those kind of great powers negotiations, because one country, one vote, will sometimes probably delay the result and the negotiation process. So we'd better have a better resolution and a better idea about what would come out as a new format for the United Nations Security Council, as now it tackles more and more very furious confrontations and conflicts in that framework. And also there have been different reform plans for the United Nations, like adding some permanent members, or adding some permanent members without veto rights. So I think it still takes time for those P5 states and some I would like to say the related states, because they might come from different countries and regions. There might be some Asian candidates and some African candidates,
right.
And in each regions, they have their priorities. So I think we should be prudent, and it still might take time for the reform.
Right, Raghida, I just want to get to one other point quickly, and that is climate change. We heard Peter Thompson talk there about the Paris Agreement. Of course, there'll be pressure now to get that agreement ratified by the nations. So far, 27 countries have ratified the deal. Are we going to see more nations get on board? Do you sense there's a recognition at the United Nations that this is an urgent issue that needs to be addressed right now?
Well, yes, there is a recognition, but there is also laxing in some countries' approach. They're not very sure that they want to do it, if you will. But yes, of course, it's a big success story for the United Nations. They all congratulated each other and themselves. And in fact, I heard some people say that this is the legacy of Ban Ki-moon. Of course, it's the work of countries, not of the Secretariat. So it's an important issue, and everybody knows the importance of it. And so I suppose there would be more people subscribing to what it takes to make this a better world. But there will still be arguments and obstacles. I just feel, if you permit me to say one thing quickly about that veto power, it is really wonderful to have big powers make major decisions. But unfortunately, the way it's been used, the veto powers, that has been in the service of national interests rather than of the interest in the international peace and security. This is supposed to be a body to guard international peace and security. International, not only national, then everything else afterwards. So maybe the day will come. I hope that this will change.
All right, great point, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. I can't get the views of our other two guests. Thanks for being with us, all of you. That's all we have time for. You